Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions during the presentation, and we'll make sure we get to them all by the end. My name is Braden Knutson. I will be your host for this webinar. We'd like to remind everyone that all of these webinars are recorded and posted onto our BYU Family History Library website, as well as our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And you can check back later for this recording and many others for review and continued learning. Feel free to write into our little poll box. Tell us where you're listening from today. We'd love to know where everyone's logging in from. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Adding Source Citations for Online Apps. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years' experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner again. We're here at the Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah at the Family History Library, and remind everybody that these webinars, this whole webinar series is being posted after they're recorded and uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and they will notify you of any new videos that are being put up. We're going to be talking about adding source citations with online apps. That's kind of an interesting topic because of there's a little bit of controversy about source citations, of course, if you've read a little bit about them. First of all, we have to confront the big word, plagiarism. And the issue here is very obvious. Now, there's a big difference between copyright violations and plagiarism. Copyright violation is a federally mandated statutory structure of protection to publishers and authors. However, plagiarism is more of not a statutory mandated issue. It's more of an ethical question, and it has to do primarily with academic type of situations where people copy others without giving attribution for their copying. It is a serious problem, and I think that we ought to be, as genealogists, we should not be part of the almost overriding internet culture that seems to think that copying anything online is just fair game. We have to remember that the things that we see, the images and the text that we read, is automatically covered by copyright law in the United States. There's no need for a notice. The law does not require that. But in addition to that, it's just a good practice to acknowledge the fact that you have copied something from someone else. If you notice, this plagiarism notice here, this big word that I copied, has an attribution down at the bottom. And it comes off the Wikimedia Commons, and the level of protection can be waived by the creator. And in this case, what it requires is simply attribution and share alike, which means you can't put any more stringent or less stringent controls on the item that is allowed to be copied, as long as you give attribution, which is the tagline at the bottom of the image. So this is kind of the introduction to the whole subject of why we're doing this citation, but there are some more very, very practical reasons for citing. And first of all, I guess we have to answer the question about what are online apps. The apps themselves are programs that are self-contained or a piece of software designed to fulfill a particular purpose. And it's a jargon term. developed by computer guys who, for a short-term form of the word application. So the word program or application or app are really kind of interchangeable. Originally, by the way, the term was coined to apply to mobile devices. They needed a shorter word because they had these little tiny programs that were running on mobile devices with limited memory and limited computing power. Well, the latest iterations of the mobile devices, which are the smartphones like that are coming out from Samsung and from Apple and from some of the others, LG and some of the other manufacturers now that are out there in the front, are actually more powerful computers than many of the mainframe supercomputers that we had just a few years ago. And so the term application really, or app, really is kind of has become kind of a misnomer because they're no longer little programs running on a limited device. They are full-blown application programs that run on a powerful computer that you carry around in your pocket. Okay, well, that's kind of the introduction. So an online app is designed to operate on a local device using what's called a browser. So here's the distinction. You have programs that are written so that they are resident on your computer, and you have other programs that are resident out there on someone else's computer, and you run them through the program you call a browser, which is resident on your computer. Now, if you're not confused about that, then I can say it more confusingly if you'd like. But basically, the difference here is that those programs, when you are disconnected from the internet, they no longer can be run on your device. If you have a program that keeps operating after you have been disconnected from the internet, then it's obviously a local program running on your particular device. And just so you can understand the next lever, the browser is a locally stored program for accessing the web. So you can you run the browser then connects to an external website, and in a sense runs the program that has been loaded into that website. So if I were to talk about this in terms of real experience, you would open your browser, for instance, Chrome or any one of the other browsers out there, and you would log into a website, let's say Family Search, and when you got on FamilySearch.org, you could then look at the family tree, and that would be a program that was operating on the internet that you could only access through your browser when you're connected. So that's kind of the situation that we're talking about. And so what we're doing here is we're going to talk about these types of applications that help us give citations to any of the sources that we actually find out there. So here's some browsers. We have Chrome. We have Safari from Apple. We have Microsoft's new browser, Edge, which has replaced the Internet Explorer program. And then we have Opera, which, by the way, is an interesting program. They've just updated it to Opera 10, and it has some interesting features that we won't go into, but anyway, it's kind of an interesting program. And then we have Mozilla's Firefox. And if you'd like to see kind of how these all stack up, here's a little pie chart that shows you which ones have the biggest bite. You can see Chrome there is the red, and Firefox is the green, and Internet Explorer is the blue. That's the old Microsoft one. And the new, anything of the other browsers out there are kind of all consumed in those and the other tiny slice of other. So there really are only a very few browsers comparatively out there in their percentage of their usage. Here's some more definitions for help. A record or a document contains genealogically significant historical information. I use those two terms interchangeably, sort of generically, referring to a record as being the thing you find that has the information, whether it's a court record or a census record or whatever it is. They're all kind of generically records or documents, and the only thing that differentiates them from any other record or document is the ones that we are interested in as genealogists are those that contain significant historical information. And when we're talking about the source is different than the document. I realize there's some terms here that overlap in common usage, and people will say something like, you've got to cite your source. Well, the source is actually where the document was found or where it could be located. Okay, so if I look at a census record and I look at it on Ancestry.com, the record or the document is the census, the U.S. federal census for 1880 or 1910 or whichever year that I'm looking at. The source is actually Ancestry.com. That's where I went to look at the document or the record. And a citation is the written description of where I got the record. So if this is where there's some area of kind of disagreement in the community, and the question is, what does the source really have to contain? What does the citation to the source have to contain? And whether or not, if I find, for example, an 1880 census of my family, copy of my family in the 1880 census, and that is on FamilySearch.org, and then I find the same 1880 census record on Ancestry, do I have two records? No, I have the same record. Do I have two sources? And from my use of the language, I would say yes, because one is on FamilySearch.org and the other one's on Ancestry. And if I use either one, I should cite the one that I use so I know where I found it. And the citation tells me that it came either from Ancestry or from FamilySearch. So this is the kind of information that we're kind of looking for out there. So here's a document. This would be an old census record, and from Sweden, and this would give you the source. So here's the source for that document. This tells you where this document could be found. There's that HTTPS //FamilySearch.org, and then all the rest of that is the address of the website of that page in the records on FamilySearch.org. And then this would be the formal citation for that. So if you're looking at the way that a citation comes out, this is a formal citation. Now the question here that immediately arises for those who are, let's say, more in tune to the issue of formal citations is, what is the correct format for this citation? Does this citation that I'm showing here on the screen conform to somebody's preconceived or predefined method of citing records? And would it be acceptable in certain circumstances to those who care about how how the form of the document is cited? How the citation form is done. So these are different questions that need to be asked, and they're things that come up when we start to use online formal citation programs that purport to create a citation that conforms to a particular citation mode. Okay, so the next thing is, you might, from seeing what you see on the screen here, you might understand why you would need help formatting a citation. This is not something that you would know about without some kind of instruction and reference to let's say, whatever you want to call it, proper formal citation that's going to be expected. So I think we have to think about what the main purpose of a citation is. What are citations? Why have they evolved? Why do they even exist? Why do we care? The first question that I would put out, the first proposition that I would put out, is that they adequately show where the information came from. Now, I depart somewhat from the vast majority of those who are of the official citation, because I think that there are citations out there that are perfectly formatted according to some citation style, and yet fail to do this. They fail to tell us where the information came from. The most common example is the citation to a book. I can format a citation in perfect format to conform with one of the major citation formats, for example, Chicago Manual style. My citation to this book could be perfect. From my standpoint as a researcher and as a genealogist, my answer to my question is, okay, fine, that conforms to Chicago Manual style, but guess what? It doesn't tell me where to go to get the book. And if that book happens to be rare enough that it's sitting in one repository someplace in the United States, all your citation is going to give me is the author, title, publisher, that kind of thing. And how do I find out who has a copy of it? Well, so there are some there are some issues out there that that I've been kind of exploring for the last many years with the citation issues. And in case there's some feedback here on the who are you to question these things type things, my answer is, well, part of the reason for reading that long thing that Braden reads at the beginning of this is to kind of put to rest any issues of whether or not I had to go through all of this sometime in my life of writing for professional journals and articles and being overwhelmingly absorbed in citation issues. Yes, I've had to do that. So I've been on that side. So I guess you would say I have the credentials to poke fun at it if I want to. Okay, so why do we need a formal citation format? There is a reason, and I'm really not questioning the need for formal citations. I simply sometimes think that I would really like to know where it is, not just get a formal citation given to me. So if you are writing for a formal publication, obviously you need to conform to whatever that publication's requirements are for attribution and citations. So if they require you to follow one particular type of citation and you want to get your article or essay or whatever published, it would probably be a good idea to conform to their style. And that's just kind of the way that the world of publication works. Also, if you want to make sure your sources are clearly and completely identified and located, it's a good idea to follow some kind of citation format so that people can recognize that you have actually cited the source. It doesn't do any good to say, well, I got it off the internet. That's kind of like saying, yeah, well, I found it in the library, and those do not clearly and completely identify where the actual idea or words came from. And if you want to follow a consistent format and don't want to have to change the way you do your citations every time, then you probably want to get into the habit of following some particular method of citing the sources. Okay, so where do you start? This is probably the good question. If you're not into the academic world, if you haven't spent your life writing articles that were graded by various people or reviewed by editors for publication and sent back to you a few times for revision, then perhaps you're not into this yet. But if you want to become if you want your work to have more credibility, it helps to have a formal citation system and one that's used consistently throughout whatever you do. It just makes a better impression for people, regardless of the level of their sophistication in reading publications. As far as genealogy is concerned, there is one level. There is a what you want to call it, the basic guidebook for citations in the genealogical community, and it's been written by Elizabeth Schoen Mills, who is an extremely competent and experienced genealogist and has acted in a professional capacity for many years. She's written a very big book called Evidence Explained, and this is the authority book on citation format for the genealogical community. And the predecessor to this was a book called Evidence. It's a much more condensed book, but it's still useful, and it's still something that you should be familiar with. And there's also some shortcut kind of publications out there, quick starts that give you just sort of a summary of the main points of all that. And these books are readily available online from Amazon or from any other the book suppliers. They also probably are in some of the larger libraries that you might go to. And they certainly are here at the Family History Library and at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City also. This is the citation to Miss Mills' book, or the books, both of them, Evidence. And these, when I put these up in a video like this, you can always go back to the published version on YouTube and pause to get the copy if you really need to get it. Or if you're really fast, you can do a screenshot when it's up there. But remember, when you're doing that, you're violating copyright. No, I'm kidding. Here we go. Well, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. We'll see. Okay, well, you can always create a source citations manually. So you can sit down there with a piece of paper and try and get it all to come out right. Those of us who lived through the typewriter age, the manual typewriter age, and then graduated to electric typewriters with correcting tape, realize that this process can be extremely tedious and very slow. But question is, how do I automate the process? In other words, do I really want to sit down there and try to figure it out from a book every single time I have to do a citation? Well, we can start out with probably the largest collection of citations, automatic citation program, or the largest automatic citation program that there is in the world, and that's called WorldCat. And the WorldCat is worldcat.org, WRLDCAT.org, and this is the catalog of all the catalog. It comes from an organization called the OCLC, and basically what that is a combined catalog that started back in 1968 of all of the, well, not all, but thousands of libraries across the world now use this service. They now have over 2 billion entries, catalog entries in this particular catalog. And after Google, this is the #2 stop for researchers who should be looking at the kinds of for materials about genealogy and about their families and everything else. This is not a word-for-word search. This is a library catalog, so it works off of subject headings. So you kind of have to be familiar with catalogs and how to use catalogs in order for it to be very useful. But when you, if you've been used to working with libraries and library catalogs, this is like the end-all of all catalogs that ever existed. And it's really a valuable thing. Almost any book or publication, everything in the Family History Library in Salt Lake, not everything, but virtually everything, and most everything in the BYU library and every other large major university library in the United States goes through this. So if I were to look up the Evidence Explained book here, it would give me a page talking about it. But up here in the corner, there's a little link, and it says Citation. And what that does is, if I click on that, is it gives me a pull-down menu of 5 of the most common citation formats. You can also export the citation to all sorts of different programs out there that are bibliography type programs, and bibliographic management programs allow you to create lists of your books and materials in alphabetical order quickly and with the proper format. So what we have here are 5 different major citation formats. Now, if you need to know how genealogy fits into this particular structure, most of the genealogical publications and sort of the genealogists in general adhere pretty closely to the Chicago Manual of Style. That's the Chicago up there. It says 15th edition. There is a 16th edition. There's some question of whether or not it's a real revision or not, but there is a they keep revising these every so often. So you need to look at the number as well as the name of the format. And usually when an article is submitted for publication or when it's being reviewed, the publisher, the editor for the publisher will have what's called a style sheet, and the style sheet will tell you what is the citation style. And it will usually say something like Chicago Manual of Style, 15th edition or 16th edition or whatever the labels are. Now these are the expanded versions of those 5 different citation styles. We have APA, which is the American Psychological Association. It's used by education, psychology, and sciences. The Chicago Manual of Style, generally used by business, history, and the fine arts, and that's where we come in, because we're more closely allied with history than some of these others. And we have the Harvard style, which is their own, and it's used but that's used by a lot of universities and other publications. And the MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, primarily in the humanities and for languages and literature. Most of what I did during my college career was based on MLA citation format. And then there's another one called Turabian, which is basically a student version of the Chicago Manual of Style, and it's sometimes it depends. And so which one of these or which other style or which proprietary personally developed style is required by any publication is really up to the editor of that publication. And there are extensive published and online style manuals for each of these different forms of style. But in addition to that, and usually what people will say is, well, I sit there and I have a copy of the Chicago Manual of Style sitting right there next to my desk. Well, I have to say, for many years I did have a book copy of the Chicago Manual of Style sitting right next to my desk, but right now I use online apps that format the anything that I want to put into the Chicago Manual of Style and it correctly print it out. So I'm no longer tied to a paper publication as I once was. Okay, so what's the difference between all of these? Oh, that's always a good question. Stylistic differences are basically advocated by different professions. So you can get to the point where you could be a little bit defensive about it, but really all professions have their own peculiar, particular way of citing material. I mentioned at the beginning that I was a trial attorney for 39 years, and as a trial attorney, I have submitted literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of documents to the court. Oh, more than tens of thousands, I would guess that many in a year, that I would submit to the court. And in each of those cases, every document had to be formatted in a way that was acceptable to the court where I was filing that document. So we had, in essence, a different style, a manual of style for each of the different levels of court. If I filed it in a justice court, it was one way. If I filed it in the general trial court in Arizona, which was called a superior court, it was another way. If it went to the Court of Appeals, it was a different way. And if it went to the Arizona Supreme Court, it was an entirely new way of submitting everything. And yes, the courts were occasionally, especially on the appeal level, would kick the stuff back out if it wasn't formatted correctly and it didn't have citations formatted correctly. So yeah, this can be serious business. It's not just something that that was trivial in at least in my personal experience. The problem I would have, for example, with a document submitted to the Court of Appeals or to the Arizona Supreme Court was that if they kicked it out, that did not stop the time for when the document was supposed to be filed. So if I filed it on the last day and it didn't conform to their standard, they could just refuse to look at it. So that's kind of serious for me and for my clients, and so this was not something that was done at all trivially with any lack of care. Okay, so there are differences between professional level citations and student level citations, and what's required of students at a college or university may or may not be the same as what it would be required by someone working in a professional level. If you want to submit an article to a professional journal, of which there are quite a number for genealogy, by the way, then each of those will have a style sheet. And when I've submitted it to those to professional journals recently or in the recent past, I'm always receive a style sheet, and I have to look at it and decide what I need to do to adopt my particular formatting to what they require. And basically, when you get down to it, though, the differences in the way that the citations are displayed, they kind of represent different goals for displaying the sources. So if the most obvious and most dramatic difference is the difference between a legal citation and an academic citation. In the legal world, there are some very specific rules for citations, and the rule that you learn and that's drummed into your head from the first day of law school is cite your sources. When you cite a case, you'd better tell the judge where you got that information, and if it isn't cited, then you really have no reason to say what you have to say. The way that our law system works is it's based on what's called stare decisis, which means the precedence of the higher court's rule. So our whole system of citation was based on the idea that we were supporting our case from arguments that had been made previously. And so we were, there was also what's called string cites. That was something that people would use to try to argue a point. They would just simply tell how many different places the same ruling had been made. Usually that was discounted by both the opposing counsel and the court, but it didn't stop people from doing it. Okay, so how do we use citations more efficiently? The answer is search for the document or the book in WorldCat, for example. Once I find the document or the book, I can just type the name in there. Okay, so I put in search for evidence explained, put in the name of the author. That gives me takes me to the book itself. Hopefully I'm able to find the book. And then I click on the citation to export it and choose which of the citation formats I like, or I feel is the one that's appropriate for or required by the type of publication that I'm preparing. And then when you go that, you're going to get a pre-formatted citation. So how does it look? What do they look like? Okay, so here's the same book, Evidence Explained, in all the different style formats. So APA and Chicago and Harvard and MLA and Turabian. Okay, I'll leave this up there for just a second so you can kind of look closely at the differences. If you look carefully, you'll see that there's a difference in spelling out the author's name or using an abbreviated author name. You'll see that the dates are either in parentheses or not in parentheses. You'll see there are periods following certain things and some commas and some colons that are different from ones to each other. There's a couple of extra words in some of them. Some of them look to be more complete. All of them have the name of the book in italics as opposed to regular text to set it off in the citation. Where the date is placed in the citation is part of the format, and you'll notice also that the author's name varies from all caps to regular capitalized text. So this is, there's some stylistic differences here, and I guess you could raise the issue of what difference does these make? Well, it seems to make a lot of difference, because if you use a different style, it will simply be rejected by the editor who thinks that they want the Chicago style. So that's the way it works. And how do you choose which one to use? The Chicago manual style is the one that's most used by genealogists. So if you want to kind of be in the mainstream of what the genealogists use, it's the Chicago manual style. And that's the one that comes up in that format. Now, what happens if the citation format doesn't fit in your genealogy program? This is an interesting question. One of the questions that's asked continually, I mentioned that there's a little bit of controversy out there about citations, and this is one of the big areas, by the way, that it gets discussed endlessly online, and that is, why don't these programs like FamilySearch.org and MyHeritage and Find My Past and Ancestry and GennyNet and go down the list, when they do a source citation, why don't they adhere to some standard form instead of sticking you with a form to fill in whatever you feel like putting in there if you can figure out what they want? And that's kind of an interesting thing, because one of the things that is not, when you get into the citation formatting, one of the big questions is the one that I raised at the beginning, and that is, where did you get it? The book, that's a perfectly good book citation, but my opinion is, well, folks, if you picked it up online, I should see where you got it online. And if you picked it up in a library, it would be nice if you told me the library that you got it in or that you looked at it in. Or if you have your own copy, you might note that I actually purchased a copy of this book and have it in my possession. Well, this format that's provided by the larger online genealogy programs for adding sources, as they say, is supposed to give you the option of putting in enough information so that if I looked at this, I would be able to go back and find where you got it. So I could see that if you actually interpreted it correctly or got the information, copied the information correctly. So the form that's here, this particular one is from FamilySearch.org. And the question here is to make sure all of the information, including the URL, which is the address, online address of the source, is included, if possible. That's just a good way to do it. Whether or not it conforms to Chicago Manual of Style or APA or whatever is kind of out the window at this point, because putting in and if you want to, by the way, there's a space there. You could put in the Chicago Manual of Style citation and then add in the rest of the information that's required by the form. Now, why does the information require this form? You want the real answer? The real answer is because some computer engineer designed it and put it up on the website and somebody liked it. Didn't have anything to do at all with worrying about whether it fit into somebody's preconceived notion of a citation. And I would say that it's never wrong to put in too much information. Absolutely should not worry about if you're putting in too much. The worst possible case, and particularly in these programs, is that you just simply leave out so much that nobody knows where you got it, and it doesn't help anybody. Okay, this is unless. There's always an unless. So it may be a good idea in these computer programs to put in all the information, but if you're writing for a journal or other publication, I suggest you follow their guidelines. You don't just start throwing in more information simply because you think it's necessary. Now, if you're writing for your own publication and you want it to look professional and knowledgeable, it's a good idea to follow the guidelines too. Or if you're a student writing a paper for a class, I suggest that you conform to whatever the professor or teacher says is how you're supposed to submit it if you want to get a good grade. Now, there's another program. This is a sample program, and there are, I'll go through here quite a few number of programs that aid in this type of process. I have found Zotero, and this is a free program. And how I found it a few years ago was that I was looking for a way to do source citations online without having to go through the process of reading the book every time to figure out whether I had a citation that looked good or not. And there were a number of them recommended. The one that was most recommended was recommended by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they said, here's 3, but use Zotero. And I said, well, okay, that's fine. So I started using it, and by the way, I had it on my computer probably for 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years, and I don't think I used it a half a dozen times. And then one day I was confronted with the possibility that I had to do an extensive bibliography, and so I thought, I got to get serious about this. I need a list of all my sources for this book that I'm doing. And so I got into it, and I got back and I said, looked online for a program, and I got to Zotero, and they said, this is one of the better ones that works. And I said, yeah, I've had that on my computer for like 5 years. Why haven't I used it? So I started using it. Now I find that it's an indispensable tool. This is really something that helps me prepare all the writing that I do all the time. So it's a very, very extensive book. There's a little bit of hype here in this, but it says it's the only research tool that automatically senses content in your web browser, allowing you to add it to your personal library with a single click. Whether you're searching for a preprint or a journal, an article from JSTOR, or a news story from the New York Times, a book, or whatever, you're covered because it's supported by thousands of websites out there. And it's true. WorldCat, for example, is a great place to get a single citation. Zotero, you can cite an entire page of the WorldCat at one time with one click. So this is, this is a pretty interesting program. And to be fair, there are several of these types of programs. There's one called bibme.org. Some of these are free. Some of them have a charge. Some of them are subscription services. So you need to be careful in looking at what you're getting into. And it may be that there's one that's more used by your particular circle of people who are doing publications or academic community or whatever. The citationmachine.net is another one. Then there's easybib.com. All of these are referring to doing a certain kind. So you'll see up at the top of this one, for example, that it covers MLA and MLAB and APA and Chicago and a whole bunch of other styles. So if you're outside of the main areas of journalistic styles or writing styles for citations, then some of these programs may cover what you need. And there's many more. So the way you get into this is you search for citation and bibliography programs on Google, and they'll start coming up. So here's all the different ones that start popping up: AutoBid and SiteLighter and a lot of other programs out there. Now we're going to go back to Zotero. It collects PDFs, images, audio, videos, books, articles, almost anything. So just about anything you come across online, you simply have to click. It installs as a browser app on Chrome and on Firefox. So if you go into Chrome, you have a little icon up in the upper right-hand corner of your browser, and anything you see on the screen that you want to cite, you just click, and it will grab it, a citation for that website or that book or whatever it is that's displayed on your screen. Now, I'm not going to say that it's 100% good. You may have to go in and edit some of the citations if the website isn't set up properly. It automatically indexes the full text of your library. So everything that you everything you collect into your bibliography is already indexed and searchable, and it's already put into alphanumeric order. So, for example, a lot of us have books. Yeah, some of us still have books, and some of us have a lot of books. And one of the dreams that I've always had is I would like to have a catalog of all my books, so I know what I have and what I don't have. And Zotero actually makes it possible. So as I pull books off my shelves and look at them and use them, I enter them into my Zotero library, personal library file. And now I'm compiling quite a long list. And so now I don't have to go back each time and pull the book in order to get a full citation. I have all my everything's set out. And then it creates a fully formatted bibliography ready for publication according to whichever style you choose in the setup of the program. Here's an example of a bibliography created with Zotero. Okay, so this is a bibliography, think. And it's not exactly indented, or it doesn't have bullets or anything, but it's all in alphabetical order. I probably could have formatted it so that there was an indent so you could see the author names or whatever, depending on which style of publication you're using. But this whole bibliography list of names here took me the time it took me to look up the books. So all I had to do is go on to WorldCat, look up the book, and add it by one click to my list. And when I was through, then I had a formatted bibliography. And so I mentioned it has a browser app. And so I can click on that to add the full citation to my Zotero list. And I can then I can create separate folders for different lists that I create, research lists or individual publication lists. I can put all of the bibliography required items in each list in a folder. So there's the little thing you have to do it. If you have a lot of browser apps like I do, then you kind of have to remember which one it is, or you might do something else that you've clicked with. So in this case, this is what the Zotero list looks like. Over on the left-hand side are a list of the different folders that I've created for different bibliography lists that I'm going back to on occasion. And then I have an unfiled items folder that everything goes into. If it's a temporary kind of thing, then I'll just go in and erase everything in my unfiled folder, and then if it's not, then I'll put it into a separate folder that I want to keep for some reason that I figure that I'll be looking for that kind of subject in the future. So by clicking on that button, it created that. It extracted all of that bibliographic information on the right-hand side of the screen in that block that starts out with the item type book. So then that is automatically formatted into the various styles that you would like to add. So I can add a whole page of WorldCat items with one click. So for example, here's this page of items, and I look down there and I say, well, I want all these books in my bibliography. And so I do that, and it comes up and it says, select the items you'd like to add, and then there's little check boxes, so I can edit which ones come in and which ones don't. And then when I click OK, everything that I've checked comes out into the bibliographic list of items. So in creating a bibliography, which, by the way, can be a very time-consuming and extremely frustrating task, by using these online apps, I've been able to create long bibliographies for my blog and for other publications with just kind of a minimum of effort. It just takes me the time it takes me to go through and click through all this stuff. Of course, the program has many more functions, and they have videos and manuals and instructional material and the whole thing on how to work this program and how it functions. And then you can copy and paste the entries from the apps into your genealogy program. So you have so basically you get the citation. So then when you have the citation, then you just simply copy and paste the portions of it that you want to and that fit into your genealogy program. So you're not really, it's not really adding the information directly to your genealogy program, but it is putting it into a format that makes it easier to copy and paste into, and it's already organized and has already extracted all of the pertinent information that you're interested in from the record that you looked at on the screen. There's a changing or to back business, and I really don't care about it. The answer to that is always, always, always cite your sources. I mean, it is the craziest thing in the world is to get into a family tree program online and find out that there is no source site to go back and redo all of the research that that person did to enter that. Now, if they just told me that they made it up, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. But often I don't know whether they've made it up or not, and so I have to guess that they have, and so I have to go look for it. So let us all know where you got your information and whether it conforms to one of the standard formats or whatever. Just give us enough information to go back and find where you got the information. And this goes for even if you made it up. Let's be honest and get up and say, by the way, I just made this person up just for fun, you know. Okay, and what happens when you don't do that? What you've done is you've launched yourself out into fantasy. Now, this is a rather nice fantasy land, but I can assure you that the one that you are putting me in is not quite so nice. So there's a vulture. Remember the vulture that's sitting up there. Okay, so what are we really trying to accomplish when we're talking about all this? We want to know where you got the information so we can check to see if you're right. That's the bottom line of this. I have to have a level of belief, of confidence that you are believable, that you have done work that is based on looking at actual documents that actually reflect what you've put down on a piece of paper. And that is kind of the bottom line where the rubber hits the road issue with it. And in the end, you need to supply enough information to find the source, and that doesn't matter what format you use. Okay, well, thanks for watching. This has been another of the BYU Family History Webinars series. And remember that all of these are recorded and put up online on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And we'd encourage you to subscribe. And also, you might want to tell your friends and neighbors and everyone else to check it out, look at the previous recordings. Thanks again for being here today, and we'll turn this back over to Braden.
Thank you very much, James, for the wonderful webinar. We have currently, just to let everybody know, we have put our October schedule up onto our website as of today, and encourage everyone to go look at that and prepare for next month's webinars. We will have one more webinar this week as well, so make sure to join us again next time. Thank you.